In this video, we discuss an overview of the political conflict that has been brewing in America for many decades. The root of this conflict is based on the varying definitions of justice we have discussed in previous videos. We have been warned. In Doctrine and Covenants, Christ said,
"Therefore I, the Lord, justify you and your brethren of my church in befriending that law which is the constitutional law of the land, and as pertaining to law of man, whatsoever is more or less than this cometh of evil."
President Ezra Taft Benson said,
"The fight for freedom cannot be divorced from the gospel, the plan of salvation. From the time I was a small boy, I was taught that the American Constitution is an inspired document. I was also taught that the day will come when the Constitution will be endangered and hang. As it were, by a single thread, I was taught that we should study the Constitution, preserve its principles, and defend it against any who would destroy it. For years, we have heard of the role the elders could play in saving the Constitution from total destruction. But how can the elders be expected to save it if they have not studied it and are not sure if it is being destroyed or what is destroying it?"
What do you think President Benson is warning about? Whatever is more or less than constitutional law based upon individual natural rights is destructive of the Constitution and cometh of evil. On the less side, undershooting means not living up to it by failing to protect individual rights. On the more side, overshooting means reinterpreting it in ways to undercut the original meaning and intent.
The Founding Fathers knew society's change, which is exactly why they provided a formal process for altering the Constitution. However, there is a deadly idea and practice gaining traction of comparing the Constitution to a living, evolving organism.
The earliest mentions of the Constitution as living, particularly in the context of a new way of interpreting it, comes out of Woodrow Wilson's book Constitutional Government in the United States, where he wrote, "Living political constitutions must be Darwinian in structure and in practice." During the Progressive Era, many initiatives were promoted and fought for, but were prevented from coming to full fruition in either legislative bodies or judicial proceedings. One case in particular, Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company, enraged early progressive activists hoping to achieve an income tax. This led progressives to the belief that the Constitution was unamendable, and ultimately to find a new way to achieve the desired level of progress. According to the pragmatist view, the Constitution should be seen as evolving over time as a matter of social necessity. Looking solely to original meaning, when the original intent was largely to permit many practices universally condemned today, is under this view cause to reject pure originalism out of hand. Another common view of the living Constitution is as synonymous with judicial activism, a phrase generally used to accuse judges of resolving cases based on their own political convictions or preferences. A majority of Americans, 55%, now say the U.S. Supreme Court should base its rulings on what the Constitution means in current times, while 41% say rulings should be based on what it meant as originally written, according to a recent Pew Research Center report on American democratic values.
Evolving meaning at the Supreme Court level makes the judicial branch all-powerful, undercutting the checks and balances the founders carefully put in place. Changing the meaning of words undercuts everything. Imagine if in all of our personal contracts like home deeds and auto loans, we could just change the meaning of the words without changing the actual contract itself. No one would dare sign such a personal contract with evolving meaning. Yet Americans are allowing government institutions to do this on the most important contract of all. In order to save the Constitution, we have to preserve its original meaning.
Do you think the Lord's definition of the constitutional law of the land has changed since the time he originally inspired the Constitution? Justice Scalia knew the living organism argument and correctly pointed out the fallacy in the comparison.
There's the argument of flexibility, and it goes something like this. The Constitution is over 200 years old and societies change. It has to change with society like a living organism, or it will become brittle and break. But you would have to be an idiot to believe that. The Constitution is not a living organism. It is a legal document. It says something and doesn't say other things.
Economist Thomas Sowell argues in his book Knowledge and Decisions that since the original designers of the Constitution provided for the process of changing it, they never intended for their original words to change meaning. Befriending the Constitution means befriending the original meaning and intent. Anything more or less than this cometh of evil. Mutating definitions are exactly the means that Lucifer used during the Great Apostasy to corrupt the meaning of powerful religious words, such as God, grace, and faith. With all religious freedom being dependent upon the protection of natural rights in a political civil society, why would we think Lucifer would leave the Constitution peaceably alone from being similarly attacked? President Dallin H. Oaks spoke about this originalist perspective.
There are other threats that undermine the inspired principles of the United States Constitution. The stature of the Constitution is diminished by efforts to substitute current societal trends as the reason for its founding, instead of liberty and self-government.
Let's consider the timeline of our nation becoming a house divided over the meaning of the Constitution. Although the division occurred gradually over many years, for purposes of this discussion, we divide the history of America into roughly two parts: the Founders' Era, 1776 until approximately 1900, and the Progressive Era, approximately 1900 until today. During the Founders' Era, the governing political principle was liberty. This originalist interpretation of the Constitution means limited government with specifically enumerated powers. The primacy issue from the Founders' Era is individual natural rights, having primacy over the authority of the state. The proper role of government during this time was to secure natural rights. As many Americans were returning from being educated in Europe, they brought back with them the political history and philosophy associated with equality having political primacy. This shift to egalitarianism in the Progressive Era could be considered as happening gradually over time. The term Progressive Era is generally meant to convey the desire to push beyond what progressives call outdated practices of the Founders' Era in order to promote equality and social welfare. A progressive interpretation of the Constitution means unlimited government, operating through implied constitutional powers. Under progressivism, the authority of the state is given primacy over the individual. The proper role of government under progressivism is to impose social justice through the means of collectivism and socialism. This leaves us today in our present house-divided situation, with an ongoing conflict between those adhering to an originalist constitution versus those adhering to a progressive constitution. Meanwhile, the American welfare state is dispensing social spending programs and accumulating debt at a level previous generations never could have imagined. Future generations will struggle under this debt that previous generations accrued.
What does a house divided look like out in the real world? As one example, let's analyze the historical map of the states being admitted into the United States as time progressed. On the timeline of our nation, as each state joined the Union over time, the percent of federally controlled lands, shown in red, shows this shift to collective statism. Looking at the eastern seaboard and the earlier states in the Union, the land is mostly under private ownership. We see a relatively small percentage of federally controlled lands for the states entering the Union from the Founders' Era. As additional states were added in the westward expansion during the Progressive Era, the land became increasingly more and more under federal government ownership. Today, the United States government owns approximately 47% of all land in the western states. The political philosophy of the proper role of government during this progressive era was to impose social justice through socialism and collectivist control of property.
Where has this left us? Herein is the political constitutional crisis where America has become a house divided. What was once constitutional republicanism in the Founders' Era designed to secure individual natural rights has become welfare statism since the Progressive Era, designed to impose social justice. The hand of government represents each side implementing its policies according to its own political philosophy perspective. On one hand, there is a constitutional originalist political philosophy, with America being a limited government under enumerated powers. The other hand, with a statist, collectivist political philosophy, desires America to progress towards unlimited government with all sorts of implied powers. The moral covering for each political hand comes from a lower branch of philosophy. The primacy issues from ethics provide the covering glove to each political implementation. The moral justification for the collectivism of social justice comes from the altruism of duty ethics. Choosing otherism in ethics logically leads to collectivist, socialist politics. The moral justification for the individualism of natural rights comes from value ethics. Choosing self-fullness in ethics logically leads to an individualist natural rights politics.
What was once a fixed constitutional structure with specific enumerated powers protecting individual rights has become a post-constitutional era with freedom collapsing under the weight of a modern administrative state. What was once we the people, meaning each individual citizen with their inherent natural rights, has become we the special interest groups. The soft tyranny of special interest groups has become identity politics, where people identify as part of collective and opposing groups, and then pile on to vote and skew legislation to pick winners and losers according to group identity. As the unelected bureaucracy sprawls, nobody can say with complete authority exactly how many federal agencies even exist. Best guesses estimate hundreds of federal agencies. The last official count of federal employees, not including the military, from the Office of Personnel Management, was at 2.7 million. Many of these agencies arbitrate claims and hand out benefits to the various competing special interest groups.
The Founding Fathers had a unique vision of what the American form of government should become. Ayn Rand said,
"The basic premise of the Founding Fathers was man's right to his own life, to his own liberty, to the pursuit of his own happiness, which means man's right to exist for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others nor sacrificing others to himself, and that the political implementation of this right is a society where men deal with one another as traders by voluntary exchange to mutual benefit."
President Wilford Woodruff said,
"Those men who laid the foundation of this American government and signed the Declaration of Independence were the best spirits the God of heaven could find on the face of the earth. They were choice spirits, not wicked men."
President Thomas S. Monson said,
Let us pause and reflect upon the many blessings we as Americans have received from our Constitution and the debt of gratitude we owe those heroic signers. As we do so, we might also recognize that freedom is not free. Sacrifice has been required to protect and to preserve the very freedoms we cherish.
President Ezra Taft Benson said,
The temple work for the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence and other Founding Fathers has been done. When one casts doubt about the character of these noble sons of God, I believe he or she will have to answer to the God of heaven for it.
There has been a movement to condemn the founders of America. The argument goes that if there is something fundamentally wrong with these privileged founders, then isn't there something wrong with the privileged political system they created? Popular historian Stephen Ambrose said,
In 1996, I was a visiting professor at the University of Wisconsin. The History Club there asked me to participate in a panel discussion on political correctness and the university. The professor seated next to me taught American political thought. I remarked to her that when I began teaching, I had required students to read 5 or 6 books each semester, but I had cut that back to 3 or 4, or else the students would drop my course. She said she had the same problem. She had dropped Thomas Jefferson's writings from the required reading list. You are being paid by the citizens of Wisconsin to teach their children American political thought, and you leave out Tom Jefferson? Yes, she replied, he was a slaveholder. More than half the large audience applauded.
Thomas West said,
Liberals condemn the founders because they supposedly did not believe that all human beings are created equal, or because they supposedly betrayed their own stated belief in human equality. Jefferson didn't mean it when he wrote that all men are created equal, writes historian John Hope Franklin. We've never meant it. The truth is, we're a bigoted people and always have been. We have seen that such falsehoods are incessantly repeated and broadcast by many of today's leading scholars and textbooks. Historian Paul Finkelman writes that Jefferson committed treason against the hopes of the world because he failed to do more to abolish slavery. Leading sophisticates, writers, professors, and journalists, whatever their political persuasion, seem convinced that there was something profoundly wrong with the origins of America.
What is the meaning of the Founding Fathers, or the 4th of July, to those denied natural rights, such as those born under slavery? Former Attorney General Eric Holder said,
When I hear these things about let's make America great again, I think to myself, well, exactly when did you think America was great? It certainly wasn't when people were enslaved. It certainly wasn't when women didn't have the right to vote. It certainly wasn't when the LGBT community was denied the rights to which it was entitled.
Does that phrase echo as discrimination in your ears?
It takes us back to, I think, an American past that never in fact really existed, this notion of greatness.
Eric Holder is obviously correct that there are self-evident examples of great oppression in our own American history. But a key issue overlooked in this perspective is greatness in comparison to what? It is a fundamental error comparing America to some utopian illusion that has never been a reality anywhere, at any time. Look around the world at any stage of history and compare the America that has actually existed with any other society that has actually existed. And then ask, how does America stack up to all of these? So what is the greatness of America? Is it possible we are talking past each other with different definitions of greatness? Perhaps a slave or the oppressed are actually the ones with the most experience to answer that question. In a 4th of July, 1852 pre-Civil War speech, Frederick Douglass, who escaped from slavery, said the following:
I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ringbolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So, indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost. Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were great men too, great enough to give fame to a great age. It does not often happen to a nation to raise at one time such a number of truly great men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration for the good they did and the principles they contended for. I will unite with you to honor their memory. They seized upon eternal principles and set a glorious example in their defense. Mark them.
Was Frederick Douglass naive? Do you think Douglass did not know that many of the founders were themselves slaveholders? Douglass knew how to differentiate between the greatness of eternal principles espoused in our political philosophy, while at the same time acknowledging our earned condemnation at failing to live up to those principles in practice. He said,
Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us slaves? There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour.
Greatness? Yes, American political ideals have always been great. But to discover the truth, we must accept all of the historical facts, including America's historical failing to live up to the greatness of its ideals.
What does this mean for us? It means we have a responsibility. It means we pay attention, get involved, and hold our government officials accountable compared to our political ideals. Thomas Jefferson said,
But rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. I do not add, within the limits of the law, because law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual.
President Ezra Taft Benson said,
No greater immediate responsibility rests upon members of the Church, upon all citizens of this republic and of neighboring republics, than to protect the freedom vouchsafed by the Constitution of the United States.
What does it mean to support and defend the Constitution in this environment? At the very least, it means that we will support and defend the rights protected by the Constitution. But it means much more than that. It means we will support and defend the values that gave life to the process by which the Constitution was created.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to the Christian Eternalism YouTube channel and visit christianeternalism.org